Now I'm assuming we're all fans of good fiction, so I thought why not take a look at 3 titles that are the epitome of top tier fiction. Most people would consider these titles the best that manga has to offer, and I am one of those people. One Piece is a part of the big 3 and is also the highest selling manga with a margin of over 100 million copies sold between it and second place. Berserk is the perfect manga and one of the best storylines in all of human creation, and I do mean that. It is god tier level storytelling. And Tower of God is just flawless in its own right. Each of these titles have done something so spectacular, so unorthodox, and so unique that they have rightfully earned all the love and support and everything that's been given to them. Except Berserk's 2016 anime adaptation. Nobody deserved that. So we're gonna do a deep dive into these titles and figure out exactly what makes them so special. What is it about these titles that have millions of people around the world so excited for every new chapter that comes out? So strap in and get comfortable because this is gonna be a long one. Doing these kinds of videos always melts my brain a little bit, so if you would be so kind as to hit the subscribe button, leave a like and comment, that would be very much appreciated. With that being said, let's get into it.
俺の財宝が欲しけりゃくれてやる。探せ。この世のすべてをそこに置いてきた。
From the very start, East Blue is a very slow introduction to pretty much everything that One Piece would later become. Say what you will about certain members of the Straw Hat Pirates at this point, but Luffy in particular is one of the most lovable characters, not just in the series, but in fiction altogether. For a child who simply wants to be the freest man in the world, Luffy has an extremely sound morality and care for those around him. Luffy's mentality, his desire for a crew, or nakama, and his carefree but considerate personality are all shaped from his childhood. So it's appropriate that we start there, with a flashback of Shanks. Shanks sacrifices his arm to save Luffy from a monster. The peculiarity of this flashback stems primarily from Shanks' reaction from this. Shanks saves Luffy with a smile on his face. This single act of heroism is burned into Luffy's mind, as signified by an intricate and beautiful moment of the two floating in the water. It's an image, the first in the whole series that is designed to stand out and stay in the reader's mind for a long time. So it's no coincidence that this is where Luffy would receive his signature straw hat. It's because this is where everything that makes Luffy, Luffy begins. Monkey D. Luffy's crew could have just easily been called the Monkey Pirates, and Oda could have made an equally stupid joke about the whole thing, but that's not what the series is built off of. This is a story about the Straw Hat Pirates and Luffy's heroic character modeled appropriately from the man that saved him as a child. This moment is engraved into our minds as well as Luffy's, fitting because, you know, he did almost die right there. Luffy's tears and screams of concern are endearing, as it conveys a shock and awe that would concentrate into a subconscious idealization of Shanks. This unquestioning urge to jump in and fight for those lacking in power is something that would go on to become a defining trait of Luffy's character and something rooted in this moment. In a way, you could say that Luffy answers his own questions by living up to the idea of a stoic pirate, by courageously marching on with the true spirit of one. Appropriately, this scene touches on the same feeling of bittersweet heroism echoed within Luffy's pivotal actions throughout the series, be it while he's trying to retain everybody in his crew or losing members of this crew. Half of the emotional moments of this series aren't focused on the loss, but instead are focused on the realization of sentimentality that we hold towards these things and people around us. This is the spirit of Luffy, and by extension, the spirit of One Piece. Losing an arm is naturally a traumatic thing to happen to anyone, and yet Shanks laughs. The freedom that comes with being a pirate has afforded Shanks a happiness that allows him to smile even through these moments. Luffy is taught the value of being a pirate through Shanks' happiness. I would say the biggest difference between One Piece and 90% of other manga and anime by stating the value of this journey before even taking us on it, and only stands as strong as it does because Oda has stuck with this concept and has gone on to display in fresh ways for so incredibly long. One Piece relies heavily on its characters. The humanizing quality to some characters is what makes One Piece so touching. You have the world government, this entity that's in place to maintain order and unify the world. At first glance, you would expect them to be the protagonists of this story, but this isn't the case. At the center of their power lies the detestable celestial dragons, who enslave and abuse whomever they please. Their deplorable characteristics and their proneness to murder and defilement embody order to an extreme. It makes the chaos that comes with the great pirate era seem like a fairer place to live. A large part of why this is because of the spirit of Luffy. Luffy's infectious personality rubs off on everybody around him, extending to the world leaders, revolutionaries, the world government officials, and even eventually a celestial dragon. For such a cheerful and carefree world, it can't be changed overnight, and can only hope for better by leaving no stone unturned when it comes to progress. This element of Luffy's character is intertwined with the world building by having the world progress after moving away from these corrupted systems, with a cast of characters that change for the better after having experienced this spirit firsthand. Blackbeard and the Blackbeard Pirates, the rival pirate crew, impose a polar opposite of the Straw Hat crew through an opposition to their idea of Nakama and of their spirit of adventure. Blackbeard and his crew live for materialistic goals, power and plundering, more so than anyone else. When stood up to powerful enemies, they cower in fear, resort to cheap shots, and rely on underhanded tactics to ensure that they come out on top. The introduction of Blackbeard almost sets him up to be a supporting character with a jovial eagerness that matches Luffy. But if you look at it a little more closely, you see that Oda was pinning these two against each other.
The dreams of pirates will never end!
One Piece is definitely not a series where people typically die. However, there are two instances of death, perhaps the two most important that direct not only Luffy, but the world as a whole. Fire Fist Ace and Edward Newgate, also known as Whitebeard. These two deaths play a pivotal role because they might be the most important ones in the series, but also the only two events in the entire story that completely squashes Luffy's pre-established spirit. Furthermore, the strongest link in setting this all up is none other than Blackbeard. Blackbeard has come far in the great pirate era, making a name for himself as one of the Yonko and obtaining the most powerful devil fruits in existence, whilst also discovering a method to maintain two devil fruits at once. Blackbeard is exactly what he wants you to think, a strong and up-and-coming warlord capable of getting anything that he wants. But in truth, he is a cowardly pirate, but one who does so with no discrepancy. Similar to the celestial dragons living up to an idea of order taken too far, Blackbeard is an example of an opportunist who lives up to this through such an extent that he would more closely resemble the idea of chaos. Orchestrating an entire war just so he can defile a corpse and take their devil fruit and calling himself victorious? Despite surviving by the skin of his teeth, Teach is a hack, a cockroach. Despite so many good people dying and so many tyrants living and perpetuating the state of the world, it's important to remember that One Piece does show that the world is capable of change, and the only man who can change this world of an order to an extreme, it is one who has fully embraced freedom. Similar to how Shanks imbued a sense of what it meant to be a pirate by smiling at his freedoms and the ability to use it for good, Luffy uses his freedom to leave a lasting impression that stays stays with the people he meets and affects them the exact same way he was left in. Character development in this series is honestly one of the main reasons, if not the main one, why One Piece is as good as it is. By taking the long route, Oda has made a pretty big chore for himself, with an epic with a plethora of genuine characters that are intertwined in a genius method, and they all connect back to the spirit of Luffy.
たどり着けば名実ともに俺たちは世界一の海賊団だ。世界一。そうか。よーし。そうさ。そしたら。
The major advantage of having a long-running series is that it allows the author to communicate a much greater degree of information to the reader. And while more times than not this can often be a serious detriment, with many artists forced to prioritize longevity over quality, in the right hands it can be used to build worlds of immense breadth and scale. Ones with stories and characters that would be completely impossible in a shorter context. This would be the primary strength Ichiro Oda would have in his arsenal as a writer, his ability to create and sustain long-running narratives, and one of the primary ways he does this is by grounding his series in a tangible, believable world. While One Piece is at its heart a story about the Straw Hat Pirates and the much sought after treasure, the One Piece, it's the encounters and the locations along the way that make up the primary bulk of One Piece's story. Each new location in the journey of the Straw Hats has its own unique identity, with its own customs, cultures, economy, and inhabitants. And a huge part of the appeal of sailing the Grand Line with the Straw Hats is uncovering these locations and discovering the mechanics of how they work. Oda has a way of giving the most visually outlandish locations a tangible feeling of place and structure. Take Whole Cake Island for example. It's a magical land where every inanimate object is alive and the buildings are constructed from confectionery. And at first it seems like a kind of Disney-esque paradise, until we find out later how the island became like this. Whole Cake Island is under the control of Big Mom, and I don't need to tell you what an absolute menace she is. But with her power to steal life directly away from the people and transfer it into everyday objects, a sacrifice is used to turn this island into her own distorted wonderland, where no one can leave and people must sacrifice a segment of their lifespan as tax. This setup alone is already a pretty fascinating way to handle a location, but perhaps even more impressive is the detail that's gone into its creation. If you remember, Whole Cake Island is home to a Yonko, meaning her territory is massive, and if you look at the One Piece wiki, you'll find pages of information regarding this one island. It goes into such detail about how there are 10 different locations that form it, including a floor-by-floor breakdown of the Whole Cake Chateau, the home of Big Mom, including detailed description of the first floor library, the fourth floor room of treasure, and the rooftop party hall. If you want to know what the weather is like for each island, where and how the residents get their food, or why there are skeletons near the seducing woods, all that information is there for you to dissect. In other words, Whole Cake Island has a tangible sense of geography about it. It feels real because Oda has taken the time to develop it. And what's more, this is just one of the many examples of the extremely fleshed out, developed locations that make up One Piece's world. Zou is a massive forest filled with beast people located on the back of a giant elephant, run by a fierce warrior dog during the day and then an equally fierce warrior cat in the night. Wano is a country with a rich history that follows a strict isolation policy. It's home to the strongest warriors, the samurai, which are all under the monstrous power of a Yonko. Dressrosa is a giant city with a massive gladiatorial arena, inhabited by bizarre toy people who are all under the heel of a vicious false king. Thriller Bark is a giant haunted ghost ship that literally eats other ships and turns their crew into zombies. And they have all been fleshed out to a similar degree as Whole Cake Island. And it all comes together to create not just the feeling of one singular massive world, but the worlds within worlds that form One Piece's landscape. And the same ethos applies to the many characters who populate it. No character in One Piece is ever constructed in isolation, but rather each individual one has their own allegiances, political geography, history, and driving motivators, many of whom have relationships and backstories entirely isolated from our heroes, like how Kaido's and Gecko Moria have beef with each other due to the fact that Kaido was the one that killed Moria's entire crew, forcing him to create the undead army that the Straw Hats would then have to face off against in Thriller Bark. These little tidbits of character information are often revealed in what seem like insignificant throwaway lines, only to become far more relevant to the story later on, to the point where I have found myself down the One Piece rabbit hole, losing entire nights going through the One Piece wiki or YouTube section, trying to understand how all of these characters fit together to create the giant ever-evolving world that is One Piece. Add the fact that Oda has hundreds of chapters to develop the world of One Piece like this means that he's been able to evolve it into a landscape that begs to be dissected and studied. If you need proof of this, there are entire communities that have built up around its analysis and discussion. There are so many One Piece YouTubers and just One Piece stuff in general that you can almost always find out something new or hear a completely new idea that you never thought of, meaning that entirely separate from the central narrative of One Piece, it's still an exclusively fascinating landscape to explore.
ルディロジャー何ですって
我ここに至りこの文を最果てへと導く海賊ゴールディ・ロジャー
Inspiration is a healthy thing for any artist. As a writer, your favorite elements of different series can factor in a huge reason why you would do something alike in your own way. Putting a different spin on things and following different archetypical stories isn't inherently bad. It all depends on how well it's executed. A prime example of this would be Naruto and its connection to Hunter x Hunter. So many similarities like the Sharingan and Scarlet Eyes, Phantom Troop and Akatsuki. Naruto took heavy inspiration from Hunter x Hunter, but Kishimoto just put his own spin on things. I think One Piece simply does this better than anything else in shonen. There are so many layers of inspiration from all kinds of different shonen and Japanese mediums that it's almost absurd to list these elements and say to yourself that this is the #1 manga in the world. And yet, it is. I'd presume that the biggest reason why it is because of how well it takes inspiration and redelivers it into its own story, but just in a refreshing way. It's always been this way. For some reason, wars between fans of popular Shonen Jump manga have always been X series is copying X series, and here's why. Well, here's the thing. Nothing is copying anything from Shonen Jump. Just call it what it is, inspiration. I think it's also worth noting that it takes an absurd amount of time before the series finds anything close to the level of quality it would be known for. The power system wouldn't even be prevalent in the first half of the series. It's there, technically speaking, but it simply isn't being utilized at all. Things slowly begin to come into being, and then long after the seeds are planted, Oda comes and reaps the harvest when the time is just right. By not making anything clear by the offsets, it makes it impossible to tell if One Piece was planned from the beginning, and lends itself to a very intricate and slow style of storytelling. But that's not to say that One Piece doesn't have its faults, and the biggest by far is the handling of the anime. Don't get me wrong, when it comes to anime adaptation, One Piece has it better than most. With some of the action action scenes having some genuinely fantastic animation, but the production does drop a lot outside of these moments, and that coupled with some truly horrendous pacing means it's hard to watch at times. Truly hard. That's why you will hear most One Piece fans who have read the manga say the anime is nothing more than a companion piece. But One Piece isn't exactly glacial. Things are happening all the time on every single page. But what makes this series seem so slow, especially at the beginning, is through what it chooses to focus on, which is to say, mostly the crew. However, the story isn't exclusive to them. The world changes from arc to arc, and off-screen occurrences happen for even some of the biggest fights in the series. Ace vs Blackbeard, Ayakoji vs Akainu, and even Shanks vs Whitebeard. It might occasionally seem like nothing is happening in the bigger picture of it all, but this is a clever method of storytelling that ensures that Oda tells the story of the Straw Hats primarily, and tells the story of an ever-changing world with plenty of interesting plot points and given plenty of time. It's easy to see it through the perspective of narrative arcs, but it does so in a multi-layered kind of sense. It has smaller intervallic arcs that detail the Straw Hats' adventure, and in the background there's an even bigger narrative arc which encompasses the world behind them, and it's increasingly moved and affected by the smaller ripples that the numerous arcs make.
散々引っかき回してくれたな。あんたのお孫さんじゃないですか。
まさかあの麦わらがここまで大きくなるとは。ひな驚き。
One Piece uses longevity as a key to growth, ensuring that a convincing world is built over time, which is crazy to think that Oda has attested that and has written the entire series without knowing anything aside from the ending. Most people would agree that writing an ending that is satisfying is the hardest part, but Oda has built everything off of knowing the ending and weaving the story from that point. This is a method that many people employ to achieve large-scale world building. And while the same could be said for One Piece, Oda does this to maintain a refreshing tone and feel to the series every couple of years. By switching between two dynamics, the Straw Hats and the world officials, we have two stories being told at the same time, ever changing. And that's without mentioning the fantastical elements of One Piece that shape its world. So even if we don't count the changes of perspective, we have a manga that has a more diverse set of arcs than anything out there. Think about it. We have a couple regular arcs, an arc in the sky, a haunted house arc, a battle arc, an underwater arc, and a samurai arc. I genuinely don't think there is a more varied and out there series in the history of Shonen Jump. So what do we have here? A plethora of outstandingly written characters in an irrefutable, beautiful world that is all moved onwards in a simultaneously organized way. These three key points are the crux of One Piece's greatness, and what keeps so many people coming back week after week to a manga and anime. A devoted fan base still strong since 1997, even through other gems. When I think about what I love about One Piece, it isn't the eventual promise of finding out what the One Piece is, or even the conclusion to the arcs that I know are most likely dozens of chapters away, but rather it's just the opportunity to return to this world and spend more time with these characters to see them fight and struggle and chase their dreams, and in turn see how the world's many moving parts react to them. This is the kind of story that could only be told over years, one carefully built over hundreds and hundreds of chapters, where each corner of the world has been realized, and yet where each horizon still brims with potential. These are the reasons so many people make the commitment to One Piece. It's a story to get lost in, one to grow up alongside, and one with worlds and characters that will stay with you for the rest of your life. The Black Swordsman arc is the first arc that we see in Berserk and is a strong, dark beginning that does not hold back on any of the intensity that we would see in the series. By doing this, it sets the tone of the manga perfectly, demonstrating how dark the manga would get and also hiding the beauty that would be shown later on. But the Black Swordsman arc doesn't only offer a limited and narrow view into what the series truly is, as it seems to drop us within the middle of the story. We don't at first identify with Guts. He is a cold, blunt, ruthless man hell-bent on his own vengeance even at the cost of others, with little consideration for those caught in the crosshair. We wouldn't realize until later on that in chronological order, the events of this arc wouldn't take place until after the second arc of Berserk, the Golden Age. Telling us the backstory behind Guts' horrific past, the Black Swordsman arc serves as an introduction to Guts as a character, and the mystery of the God Hand and the Beylit and the world of Berserk as a whole. It's only after these first two arcs conclude that we realize the weight of Guts' mental state and how far he has truly fallen. After finishing the Golden Age arc, we are able to look back at Guts' life as the Black Swordsman and identify with him as a character because of his struggles. We're also introduced to another main character named Puck, who is a small lovable elf that really juxtaposes the dark brutal nature of Berserk's world. Putting these two together, they make an iconic duo, but Puck in the beginning serves as the audience's questioning as to what Guts is doing and why. The Black Swordsman arc and the Golden Age arc play off each other in a really unique way that I don't think I've seen ever before in manga. Just as the existence of the Black Swordsman makes it all the more tragic as we watch Guts lose everything around him, the eclipse and Guts' downward spiral changes our positioning into one of absolute respect and hope that he can fight and win against these enemies. The criticisms for this specific arc comes from the characterization of Guts being a little too off the mark for what he would later be known as, especially from this page. People claim that within the context of the later story, somebody who had just lost their lover wouldn't do this. And I'm not gonna pull the excuse that Miura didn't know that Casca was going to be a part of the story back then. Even though that is true, he didn't know that Berserk was going to contain a love story of any capacity. But my main counter to this being a possible off the mark moment is simply the fact that Guts isn't the man he once was. The whole reason we aren't positioned with him is because his morals are clouded by a fantasy of revenge. This isn't an act of love like we see him commit to in the past. This is Guts at his absolute worst. Miura knew what he was doing when he was writing this arc. It's essentially what this arc stands for. While this being a part of Guts' characterization, I'm still a little in defense about the whole thing. But to truly highlight his lowest point, we have him taking pleasure from deluding this apostle into thinking that she has Guts right where she wants him, only to savor the moment where he instead flips the situation by putting his arm cannon in her mouth and murders her. This is the very first page of Berserk. We don't open up this manga and find a hero. It's more like, this is not good, but I'ma keep reading ahead because I want to see where this goes. That's the whole idea of the Black Swordsman arc. It's a twisted, brutal piece of dark fantasy that reveals in its grim appearance, but has some fantastic substance to it that becomes clearer with time. The Golden Age arc is one of the most critically acclaimed arcs in manga history. This arc begins focusing more heavily on the clashing philosophy of our two main characters, essential details to understanding the backstory of Guts, the growth of Griffith, and how everything goes awry when a wrench is thrown into the works in the form of a love interest. The Golden Age is a fairly simple premise if condensed, the band of mercenaries that end the 100 Years' War. However, that description is a disgusting undertelling of this arc. It's incredible to think how much Miura would add to that. It's a truly rare occurrence that an arc never loses its charm, an arc that only becomes better after each reread. The Golden Age arc is a story that can be seen almost exclusively by itself at no cost other than not knowing how things end. Miura, as both a writer and artist, elevates so much through this arc, and it's plain to see. Primarily, I think a lot of quality from this arc comes from the three backstories that we would get for each of our three main characters, Guts, Griffith, and Casca. Guts' backstory is at the very beginning of the arc and literally shows his struggles since the day he was born into this world. The characterization in this arc is absolutely some of the best in the entire series. We follow Guts and his troubled life, and the abusive environment that he was raised in. More than anything, as a flashback to the main character, it sets up a precedent to explain Guts' future behavior and ideals to this very day. Guts' origin story is so rich and detailed for this very purpose of being used as a source of his future actions. Later on in this arc, Guts doesn't want to be touched by anyone because of Donovan raping him and Gambino being the one to sell him out. He doesn't want to belong to a mercenary band entirely due to the fact that he was hunted down by his old one after incidentally killing his father. The things that happened to Guts in his early years directly affect the relationships that he would go on to develop, and this is even true when it comes to his romantic relationships. Guts and Casca's relationship culminated in the two getting hot and heavy with each other, only for Guts to be taken back to this dark moment. He is forced to confront his trauma in front of his lover, and so not only does Casca accepting Guts and his past allow Guts to get past this trauma, but it develops the both of their characters in a very sublime way. Casca's backstory is at the middle of the arc, and it displays her childhood being sold as a servant to a perverted nobleman, only to be saved by Griffith. Casca's strength as a character comes from her choice to serve Griffith. As an impressionable child with nothing else to live for, Casca begins to idolize this man and becomes known as the strongest soldier in the Band of the Hawk aside from him. Loving a man who plans on becoming a king and who plans to marry a princess is delusional, and Casca doesn't originally want to admit this. Casca is so angry when we first see her because Guts shows her that what she wants could never be achieved. By Griffith noticing Guts and wanting him to join the band, it forces Casca's ambition into perspective. She is originally in denial, then becomes aggressive, but eventually comes to accept that there's nothing she can do about it. What's interesting to note is that Guts is the man whose dreams are constantly wavering and uncertain, is the one to stop others' already realized dreams from happening. Not only does Casca conclude her dream is a fantasy, but Griffith would also become more infatuated with Guts being a part of the band than him following his original goal, to the point where Guts leaving causes Griffith to go down a path of self-destruction. With an understanding of both Casca and Guts' relationship, we get a climax to their backstories, as we see one of the few happy moments of Berserk. Griffith's backstory is at the end of the arc, which is fitting, as we find out that his main character trait is that he simply wants to follow his dream of having his own kingdom. Along with the introduction of the political world of Berserk, all of these would combine and clash, and the conflict would lead up to one of the most infamous and best climaxes in anime and manga history. So highly does Griffith hold this ideal, this dream, that he sacrifices the entire mercenary band in order to achieve it. Griffith works so well as a villain because the fact that he never betrayed his own ideal at the end, and had apparently kept it with him throughout all this time, even while he was being tortured in the dungeon. The dynamic between Guts, a character in search of a dream, and Griffith, a man who is willing to do anything for his, is what would lead up to this moment. And since he has now been crippled and has nothing to live for, Miura shows us how useless Griffith is, to the point where he tries to commit suicide. Meanwhile, Guts has found true love and happiness with Casca. There are multiple variables of individual actions and divine intervention and manipulation that would bring us to this inevitable moment. Like I mentioned before, Griffith is a man who would do anything to achieve his dream, even if it's a horrible decision. From Guts' perspective, Griffith is obviously the enemy for taking everyone he held dear, but from Griffith's perspective, nothing mattered from the get-go. This was all just a couple of steps on the bridge to Griffith's castle, with Guts only ever being a distraction from his ambition. That's made clear to us when right after Griffith activates his Bailey, he screams in his mind for Guts to stay away. Guts isn't even an enemy in Griffith's perspective. He's literally nothing, and that's what makes Griffith such a compelling villain and compelling character. Where Casca saw her fantasy as something that could not be attained, she managed to discover a stronger ambition from it and push forwards. Instead of overcoming his broken dreams, Griffith falls apart because of it, and eventually goes back on himself, forcing the pieces of his broken dream back together by sacrificing everybody. Griffith became weak and that he could not push forward when Guts left the band, like how Casca pushed forward after her dream was broken. Instead, Griffith wallows in self-pity and comes to regret it by not growing from his failures. The brilliant villain is the one who chose not to take the same path as the ones we admire, but one who sticks to his ideals and ego, which is ironically what we have been rooting for this entire time. I think this element of Griffith's character staying true to his dream is what makes the eclipse so dreadful. By choosing to support him, the band of the Hawk's lives were forfeit, and as much as they and us the audience may not like it, it's what we've all chosen as well, to see Griffith's dream realized. Trust me, I'm no exception from this when it comes to that simple fact. The truth is, Griffith is such an enamoring person that he fooled us all. Griffith's soldiers would have left the band at some point if they didn't want to see how it would turn out, and we could have stopped reading Berserk if at some point we didn't, as Griffith's dream was the main plot point this entire time. Although it's horrific, Griffith has integrity, and it may be because of this that he's so terrifying. By choosing to sacrifice, he is as much the Griffith that we first met in his ideals, and this culminates in probably the most depressing climax in manga and anime. When Guts is running, seemingly from nothing, without any sense of direction like he's had his whole life, memories of the band are flooding Guts. We feel nothing but empathy for Guts and antipathy for Griffith. Soon, Guts is attacked by what seems to be ghosts, and as the Skull Knight appears telling Guts his new fate and destiny as a struggler. It's at this moment that Guts declares war on all of demonkind, and beginning the motivations that would go on to formulate the Black Swordsman arc, with the rest of the grieving process yet to come. The Conviction arc has an overarching mysterious plot that is coming together, and right beside that is amazing character development. The Conviction arc is something that covers very deep in core themes to us as people. How we move on from our past struggles and not allow them to define us. What we choose to put our faith in, and the abuse of something that was meant to give hope. Essentially, what are your convictions? As I was saying before, Guts enters the next stage of grief. Bargaining. By wanting to protect Casca no matter what, Guts is beginning to accept the loss and even talks to the band of the Hawk, albeit through hallucinations. But there's also another side of Guts that he's desperate to lock away, the Beast of Darkness. The Beast of Darkness doesn't just yearn for Guts to get revenge, he also desires other things, such as a disgusting primal instinct to rape Casca like Griffith did, to lose himself to the anger and abandon saving Casca altogether. Because of these multiple different and often clashing impulses, we can identify the Beast of Darkness as a personification of Guts' base instincts. The Beast is Guts' darkness. This is quite a heavy arc when it comes to philosophy, to the kind expression that God is dead, to the power of free will. Guts is the man who, among crowds of swarms of people, retains a cool head and ultimately survives, not by clinging on to a god who isn't going to save him, but by forging his own path through all of those who want to kill him. Guts asserts his literal power over everybody who stands in his way by bringing down his sword upon them. We already know that his ideals are sound and that his character is respectable, but with the Black Swordsman being a fully grown man wielding the Dragon Slayer, something which requires a godly amount of strength to wield, Guts begins to fit the idea of a better superhuman, by using every force given to him by nature to achieve what he believes is right. The current world of Berserk is beginning to literally crumble away. The superhuman survives because he knows he can and does so with his own force. The swarms of people around this superhuman do nothing but try to survive in a way that accomplishes nothing, and ultimately they all die. What I find most intriguing about this arc is its use of religion, but at the same time it never once gives a moment to embrace the value of religion either. The ideas and themes explored in the Conviction arc are often likened to the philosophies of nature. Because of how nihilistic the series would be if we did not have Guts pushing forwards and constantly making his own purpose for carrying on, finding Casca again and never letting her go, and finally resolving to bring her back somehow, Guts pushes through everything that is held against him, when it should make more and more sense for him to give up. It's a fantastic little comparison that is only unique to the Conviction arc. The Conviction arc is truly about setting up the next stage of Berserk's world, who encounters who, and the different characters that we would meet, and how those new characters interact once they meet Guts, Casca, and Puck. It's breathtaking really, thinking about how Mayor keeping along the pace of the narrative whilst introducing all these completely new characters, expanding upon the world building while equally adding to the characters that were present, and doing all this while maintaining this mysterious thriller of a plot within this specific arc, bringing back one of the most influential characters and doing it in a way that not only makes sense but adds tension to the said arc. Guts reuniting with Casca, the introduction of the egg of the perfect world that swallows the demon infant that came from way back in the Golden Age arc, along with Guts encountering Farnese, Serpico, and Isidro, eventually having the battle with Mozgus, Luca the one taking care of Casca along with the Skull Knight, which the Skull Knight encounters the egg of the perfect world, and yet all this is due to the manipulation of the God Hand and causality to bring forth Griffith. Once Guts defeats Mozgus and is reunited with Casca, once all things seem to go well, Guts looks upon the light to see the man who took it all from him returning once again. Guts' quest for himself and by himself would come to an end. With the beginning of the Millennium Falcon arc, we begin to see a group of people form a family with Guts. As stated before, Guts has matured from wanting to do nothing but revenge against Griffith and the Apostles to wanting to save Casca, from a desire to destroy to a desire to preserve. And Guts is now a responsible adult who wants his lover back. So the group becomes a necessity for him to achieve this goal. Guts is forced to have people back in his life again, similar to how Guts took the chance and allowed himself to become affiliated with the Band of the Hawk. This is just good for Guts in many ways. Not only will he see Casca come back to him, but unknowingly he will also finish his grievance over the Band of the Hawk in the form of acceptance, the final stage of grief. He never expected that once again he would feel a part of a group. Linking back to his distance after the first failed mercenary band, Guts once again entered the dark seclusion from his childhood, feeling a sense of loneliness and distance. He didn't want to belong to something because it would just crumble away like they have all done before. We see this very clearly in the Conviction arc as Guts speaks to Jill about those which follow him, and how she can never accompany him, nor anybody else. It takes all the way up to this moment for Guts to finally get over his grieving and realize that he does have somewhere he belongs to once again. This group dynamic was incredibly healthy not only for Guts but for the manga as a whole. If not for the group, Guts would forever be stuck in a place of grief and torment, never progressing as a character. Unless people wanted to have a stagnant main character who just gives into his darker side and abandoning everything for killing Griffith, then then this was ultimately the best move Mayora could do. This is all natural and necessary for the progression of the series to occur. It's so we can see Casca back and see Guts realize his ever-changing dream that this group is needed. Guts needs to be able to finish the narrative arc of his comrades' deaths by coming to terms with it. And I truly believe that this is why this particular moment stands out and seems so heartfelt. The tragic themes of this series are very much alive, but at the same time, Guts has developed as a person by wanting Casca back. He simply wants to return to happiness and later admits that during this time he's trying to forget about doing anything to Griffith. The tragedy comes from the fact that it is too late to simply forget about it, with the Beast of Darkness literally eating away at him. So now Guts and his new companion set off on this new journey, and soon they encounter this village being ravaged by trolls, and there is where they would encounter Shariq, a little witch who will serve as the final member to their group. She serves a humongous role introducing a little more of the magic element of Berserk, adding a smooth transition, as well as being connected to some other characters who play a very big importance. She takes Guts and the rest to her teacher, Flora, who has a relationship with the Skull Knight, though it's not made clear what type of relationship. While being there, they are ambushed by Griffith's new band of the Hawk. Guts' manpower has already reached its peak, to the point where it isn't enough to help him in this fight against Zod and Grumbel, meaning Guts gets his ass handed to him. Guts needs the Berserker armor, but since it saps away from his spirit and body, Guts' physical condition has gone from peaking to degrading, with white hair growing on his head, eyesight that is beginning to blur, muscles and bones becoming weaker, and an overall more withered appearance as time elapses. And yet he keeps pushing forward, using the Berserker armor to fight numerous enemies thanks to Griffith, Ganishka, and the state of the world after the rebirth ceremony. To grow as a person, he has had to weaken as the Black Swordsman, while the Beast of Darkness grows in power instead. The further he gets from the angry Black Swordsman, the closer he gets to the Beast of Darkness, which is what unfortunately fueled him all this time. This is where the importance of Shariq comes to play, as she is the only one who notices Guts' degrading condition, and more so the problems of overusing the Berserker armor. The struggle of becoming something similar to a hollow suit of armor is a tragedy in and of itself for a character that has accomplished so much. This series never really turned lighthearted at all, instead showing an even darker underbelly of one of our favorite heroes. While all that is happening, on the other side of the map is Griffith in his reborn form, along with his Neo Band of the Hawk in the form of apostles. Although this time he has introduced a core element to the future of Berserk, that of the Moonlight Child. During the ceremony of rebirth, the egg apostle fused with Guts and Casca's baby, causing both Griffith and the baby to both get reborn. Although the egg only produced one body, this body is shared between Griffith and the baby. Though they don't share the exact same form, they have their own appearances, but it would seem Guts and Casca's child only gets to appear in his form on the night of a full moon, whilst Griffith gets to enjoy the rest of this time with his body. Griffith and his reborn body is no laughing matter. Not only does Griffith have absolute control over the will of all the apostles, but he is a near omnipotent creature who can take literal sword swings, crush physical matter into nothingness, and to top it all off, is seen as a messiah by all those around him. With this new power, Griffith has everything he needs to achieve his goal. Ganishka is a formidable threat with his ethereal apostle form that cannot be touched, let alone harmed by physical creatures. And after coming as far as he has in conquering Midland, Ganishka bites off more than he can chew by directly challenging Griffith, a fight you would think a apostle would know not to challenge. His bravado would be meaningless before the careful tactics of Griffith. Ganishka willingly sacrifices himself to the man-made Bailey, which transforms him into a massive behemoth. Just like a god out of an epic tale, Griffith gets his kingdom from slaying this monster and becomes the true leader behind both humans and apostles, uniting them both under the utopia known as Falconia. The entity of pure evil now resides in the most harmonious place in the world, and in a dazzling display of artwork, Miura shows us the fruits of Griffith's labor, and we witness the magnitude of how big of an event this is for the plot of Berserk. We get our first true bold endgame step with Falconia's creation. Griffith has now crossed the bridge and now lives in the castle he has long dreamed of. The corpses that gave him the steps to reach it are truly left behind. Fantasia serves as the most beautiful arc with a more fantasy setting than ever. Miura has shifted from the dark world of Berserk, showing the impacts of Griffith's kingdom and the reality of how far Guts and his crew have gone. With the physical and astral world now merged, the creatures we see are no longer limited, and this becomes very apparent with Guts killing a sea god from inside its stomach and then being saved by Meros. It's truly a great fight, and looking at the artwork in this arc compared to the Black Swordsman arc, it is truly like night and day and shows Miura's evolution as an artist, and it's amazing. From the other perspective, we see Griffith and his kingdom taking care of his enemies, and seeing Recurrent go to Griffith to speak to him regarding the truth of his past, which leads him to slapping Griffith in the face. And ultimately, with that being the most satisfying slap in all of anime and manga history, Recurrent goes down as one of the best characters of all time. Miura in this arc was trying to show us how far we've really come in the story of Berserk, as we get to see Recurrent all grown up taking on Griffith, and we also eventually get to see the inner mind of Casca. We even get a flashback with Guts' character, a small but nonetheless beautiful with a spring flower of days long past, which is where we get to see a teenage Guts before he met the Band of the Hawk. One of the most interesting things as well is we get to see more of the Moonlight Child in this arc, truly opening up the possibility of Griffith's downfall or even his redemption. This arc truly opens up the possibilities that can happen within Berserk. It's an arc with plenty of reflection, and I think that is made most apparent with Casca's dreamscape. An amazing telling that Miura was able to depict of Casca's fragmented mind, putting what's really metaphysical and hard to grasp into an artistic form, giving it visual representation. Things like Guts, the eclipse, and all of her other traumas. And we finally get to see Casca regain her mind. However, the tragic part is she cannot see Guts. Now Guts is once again at a crossroads. Encountering the creator of the Berserker armor, he sees what was once the life of the Skull Knight. A little bit of info into his past and lore, and in that flashback we're presented with what seems like a previous version of the God Hand. Truly monumental stuff for Berserk. Sadly, the world would be shocked when the sad news of Kentaro Mura's passing on May 6, 2021. Berserk has chosen to continue releasing thanks to the help of Kentaro's longtime friend Koji Mori. Kentaro Miura has truly changed the world with this manga, and I think can rest easy knowing that he will not be forgotten. In the beginning of this video, I said Berserk is one of the best stories in all of human creation, and I stand by that. Whether Berserk was going to continue or not, I was just happy enough knowing that I was able to read something as good as this. Miura has changed the world and will forever live in the hearts of millions. Now, I know most of you are confused or calling me crazy and stupid as to why I would put Tower of God in a video all about great writing, when I just went over two classic titles that are the antithesis of everything that is Tower of God. So, let me start off by saying this. I hate tower-centered storylines. I think they are some of the most boring and lazy plot points in all of fiction. It's always the same. 99 out of 100 times, it's just some stupid power fantasy, and all the MC has to do is climb the tower, get strong, and he saves the world or something like that. It's lazy writing. It's that simple. But like I said before, all of these titles are unique, and Tower of God is no different. It beats the odds. Sure, the main premise still revolves around this almighty tower that can apparently grant any wish or desire or something to people who can successfully climb it. Exactly what's at the top of the tower is left kind of vague, as it's only really there to give the characters some sort of motivation to ascend. As the story progresses, the ultimate goal of reaching the top of the tower becomes less and less important because of what really shines about this series is the world building, the fights, and the characters. The tower is less of a structure and more like an entire world in and of itself. Each floor has its own dynamics, rules, social structure, and sometimes even ecosystem. We are thrown headfirst into this massive world where you were only ever shown one tiny bit at a time. My favorite part about this series is there is no hand-holding where a character just immediately dumps the entire history of everything you need to know on your lap. You are left to discover the world with the protagonist and friends, in a lot of ways kinda like One Piece. You hear bits about the history, the geography, the political structure, and piece by piece this slightly built up your understanding of the tower as a whole, and the pieces start connecting. It evolves into this grand story, and from there you're just sucked into this massive fantasy that is miles ahead of any kind of story that you have read before. From the first few chapters, you quickly understand that you are standing at the base of this enormous mountain, and you just see the tiniest of glimpses to what this title is capable of. And I absolutely love that feeling. The feeling that you're not just seeing this generic world being made as the story progresses, but you're stepping into a pre-existing one with centuries of history and lore that was already constructed before the story even started. It's one of those titles where you don't know how long this could go on for. Every single aspect about this series has gone into such detail, like the power system and fights, because it's intrinsically tied into the mechanics of the world. And what really enables it to shine are the tests on the floor. Like all tower storylines, there are various tests the participants must complete in order to ascend. And these tests can range from simple death battles to elaborate mind games. As the participants ascend the tower, the tactics behind passing a test becomes more intricate. There are always several layers behind every action taken, and this is especially true when it's constructed behind the rules of whatever test is being taken. There's a lot to Tower of God, evident by the fact that there are close to 600 chapters, and it doesn't even feel like we're halfway through it yet. If I was to just simplify Tower of God and explain to you why this title is in this video next to the likes of One Piece and Berserk, I'd say this. Tower of God is undoubtedly one of the best shonen titles of all time, and I would say it could easily hang with the best like One Piece, Hunter x Hunter, Naruto, etc. The story of a lost boy struggling to survive in a world that wants him dead is a good enough plot to get anyone to read, but what keeps everyone coming back is how rich and beautiful it all is. This world is ever growing, meaning there are plenty of places left to explore, and where there are more places to explore, you get more history, meet new people, uncover hidden secrets, and kick some overpowered douche's ass, and of course laugh along the way. At the end of the day, this is a story about family and bonds, and how it's not blood that makes a family, it's the people you choose. Bam never got a chance to be with his parents, and the only person he felt most strongly about threw him away like he was trash. Bam climbs the tower, meeting people, and makes these friendships, but it seems like the tower is always trying to push him into solitude. After all, he is an irregular. He is someone who's not meant to exist in the tower, and has the power to very well change everything about it. Kun Aguero Agnes abandoned his family, one of the 10 great families, and climbs the tower in hopes of one day reaching the top so his desire to overthrow his father can be achieved. Rak Wraithraiser is a descendant of the Native One, a species thought to be extinct. He climbs the tower with no particular reason other than to get stronger. These are our three main characters, people with nothing in common other than the fact that they are all alone with nothing to lose. After overcoming the first test, they become family and travel this enormous world together. Tower of God is an adventure that no one can be disappointed in. It's an invisible thing for those just getting into Tower of God, or for those who have only watched the anime, and I think that knowledge of this, for example seeing this video before reading the series, doesn't impede on your enjoyment of the series one iota. In fact, I would argue that it would strengthen the delivery of Sui's writing. To be able to sit back and embark upon this series by understanding that this is how the story works, it makes you want to read weekly because you want to see the top of the tower obviously, but on the way you're more excited to see things like the Floor of Death, the last station, and how the hell on earth Bam is going to take down Jihad and the 10 great families, or the next insane monster that Bam is gonna fuse with, the mystery of Jihad and the entire history of the tower, and the organization Foog and their plans to take over control. These are the plot points that serve as an endgame, and not even counting these, there are character interactions you want to see, like Bam and Enryu and what kind of dynamic they will have. What's the history between the two, and what's the connection between Enryu and Bam's mother? Will Kun and the other family members ever settle their differences, if that's even possible? What about Jihad and Bam? Jihad knew Bam's parents and was in love with Bam's mother. What sort of confrontation will they have when they first meet? There are just so many characters and tantalizing storylines on the horizon, and it all truly takes on the tone of an adventure that trumps anything else you can think of. Everything we just talked about, from the characters, the world building, and the structure, continues to grow and improve the more and more you consume. It's almost better than the beginning of the series, as it was as gradual and lesser in quality, because it helps the series grow not only in scale from a storytelling perspective, but it helps you pace your consumption on the level of a reader or watcher. The richness of everything in Tower of God has had over a 500 chapter ascent throughout the years, and we are now at this point where we are at the cusp of hundreds of alluring tidbits concluding together before the series. Sui has come across a goldmine of storytelling and has written his name down as one of the best authors of all time, and in doing so, Tower of God has got a tender spot in the hearts of millions. I hope you enjoyed this long ass video, because this is something I don't think I will ever be doing again anytime soon. Just recording this video was a real pain in the ass. I'm terrified of what the editing situation is gonna be. And for anyone who actually stayed and watched every single second of this video, you're crazy and I fucking love you. And I don't want to keep you guys here any longer, so that's gonna be it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. It really means a lot, and I will see you guys next time.